Okay now? Okay. So we're going to talk about meditation and what does it mean to think in terms of meditation with no method and no system. So I'm not very familiar with varieties of meditation, but just in the course of daily life, you hear about different kinds of meditation from time to time. And I've never heard anyone say anything remotely like what Krishnamurti says, that there absolutely categorically cannot be any method, any system to meditation. And if there is, it's just not real meditation. So in this field, as in so many other fields, his point of view seems to be extremely original. And this is not just a statement that he makes in a casual or offhand manner, but something that is clearly of great concern to him and expressed in a great variety of ways in many, many different contexts. So it makes an interesting subject for discussion. And Krishnamurti's meditation was so unusual that, according to his diaries and certain things that he said to people close to him, he used to meditate in his sleep. And in fact, that was a very common thing for him. And you might think, well, if he was asleep, how would he know that he was meditating? Or maybe he was deluding himself, maybe it was really just some form of dream. But that doesn't seem to be the case, because he would wake up in a state of meditation, and he would be aware upon waking that he had been in a state of meditation, which would be different than other times when he would wake up and find out that he had just been dreaming or nothing was going on. But there would be certain times when he would wake up and have the awareness that he had been meditating while asleep, and then the meditation would continue for a period of time after he woke up. So it was a process that he was in contact with in some way, and could know, with reasonable certainty that it had occurred to him during his sleep, which is another one of the very, very unusual features about his approach or his experience of meditation. So, when I was here last year talking about Krishnamurti and David Bohm, we spent one of our sessions talking about meditation, and on that occasion, I think there were about as many people as there are now, and I asked to go around the room and have each one say what was their own experience of meditation, if they had ever tried it or practiced it or had any experience of it. And I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you to do that again tonight, but I will say that I found that responses that people came up with, to me, were very, very interesting. There was quite a variety of responses and experiences, and I will just say that if during the course of our discussion you feel like sharing any of your personal experiences, I think it would be, it would kind of enrich our conversation and would be very helpful and relevant, even though whatever practice you may have done of meditation, might not conform to the official Krishnamurti approach. It would be good to share it anyway if you feel like it. And so just a few other things before we dive in more deeply. As I mentioned, I guess last night, there are certain reports in the memoirs about Krishnamurti which indicate that he did do certain things which, on the surface, seem to represent a practice of meditation. As I said, he had a whole conversation with Mark Lee in 1965, in which he gave him certain sort of preliminary guidance about how to sit and so on. And Mary Zimbalist also reports that there were 2 or 3 occasions when she was with him, and they were also with Alan Naudet, and he would invite the 2 of them to come and sit with him and meditate, and Mary would describe how they would sit together, and what struck her about it was the exceptional quality of stillness that she felt in observing Krishnamurti and being with him at that time. So once again, this would appear to represent some kind of practice, maybe very, very rudimentary in the sense that there's not much of a detailed inner methodology, but something is going on there which seems to be a little bit more than just saying absolutely no method, absolutely no system whatsoever. So if we're going to look into it a little bit more deeply, certain things come up, and for me at least, and one of the puzzles for me is that it would seem to be the case that any effort to meditate or any practice of that kind must entail to some extent the observation of one's own thinking process as it occurs. And for me, the crucial question, if one wants to approach meditation in anything remotely like what Krishnamurti is talking about, it seems to me the crucial question is, what is your intention? You must have some kind of intention when you sit down with the notion of doing anything remotely like meditation. Otherwise you wouldn't sit down. You would watch TV or do some work you have to do or go for a walk. But you're sitting down and you have some kind of intention. And it's some kind of intention having to do with your inner activity, with having to do with where your attention goes. So you must have some intention vis-a-vis your attention when you're meditating. So it seems to me. You must have some intention. And normally one would think that it has to do with observation of thought in some form or another. But then comes a certain dilemma, which is, suppose you sit down and say, okay, I'm not really going to have any method or system, but I'm going to sit and I'm going to observe my thoughts and just kind of see what happens, take a kind of a relaxed, open-minded approach to it. Well, either you find that you can't really observe your thoughts very well. Your thoughts go running off in various directions, and you find you're not really paying very much attention to them. Or you get more serious about it and say, look, I really want to observe my thoughts. But then there comes a paradox, because to observe your thoughts, or to have the intention to observe your thoughts, that intention is itself a thought. And so then you have kind of a dilemma, which is, okay, if I'm going to observe my thoughts, that means I have to observe the fact that I have an intention to observe my thought. And then you're just kind of stuck with that intention. Where do you go from there? So these are some of the puzzles that seem to me to arise in connection with this. And before I ask Dr. Krishna to help us out with this, I'd like to just read to you a kind of a random collection of things that Krishnamurti has said about meditation. He says, to find out what is meditation. He says, a thought is an impediment to meditation, but only through meditation can the impediment be dissolved. Also, he says, where there is a meditator, there is no meditation. As long as I'm trying to meditate, meditation is not. The essential nature of meditation is never to be conscious that you are meditating. And meditation is really the abnegation of the self.
Could you say the last one?
Meditation is really the abnegation
What is that?
of the self. Abnegation, it's,
Denial of the self.
Denial?
yeah. Abnegation, it's related to the word negation, but it's a little bit deeper and more subtle.
Elimination.
So,
you finished? Okay. Yes, his take on meditation is very different from what any other source talks of as meditation. He says, meditation which is done as part of coming upon self-knowledge, which is learning about oneself, is part meditation. Because without that understanding, without the freedom from conditioning and so on, you have no basis for thinking. And if you have some goal to be achieved, then it becomes a desire process, and that sustains the ego. So it cannot lead to abnegation of the ego. So that's what David mentioned, that the motive with which you are performing is important. So if the motive is part of the learning mind, it's all right to practice any technique. Then it's part experiment to understand one's relationship with that, whether it be thought or concentration or awareness, or watching which way your thought moves when you don't force it in any direction, and so on. It's done experimentally, observationally, in order to learn about your own mind. Then that's part of the learning about oneself. And so that's all right. But when it is done with a motive of achievement, that you want to achieve something, that only one thought should be there, or you have an aim to which this meditation will take you, then it becomes a desire process, it becomes an ego process, because you are trying to achieve something consciously. And then it's not meditation, according to him. So in the beginning, I guess one would use some technique just to understand, for example, what they talk about in Vipassana, that you watch your breath and keep watching and you find out what is your relationship with breath, and does it slow down or what happens. But you do it with a learning mind, an experimental mind. And similarly, you try to concentrate on a spot on the wall or something, and then you detect how your mind wanders off from there. So all this is part of the learning, as part of experimentation, which is part of learning about acquiring self-knowledge, learning about how your own mind operates. He also suggested, for instance, to keep a diary and write down in the evening all the thoughts that have gone through your mind, and so on, and then read it afterwards to understand yourself. So these are all experimental ways in which you want to discover regions of your own distinct mind which you are not normally conscious of or aware of, and you want to expand your awareness of the way your own mind functions. So it's not really a technique with a view to achieve something, but it's a technique with a view to learn about oneself. And he would say that is part of meditation, because learning about oneself and coming upon self-knowledge is part of meditation.
Are you saying experimentation is not a method?
If it is not seeking an end, then it's not egoistic. It is meant to discover. For example, I may decide to fast just to see what is my dependence on food or what is my relationship with food. What happens when you fast or have only a juice fast or something like that. So you are just trying to learn about yourself, your system. Then it is not egoistic activity, it is part of the learning activity. And that, he said, is part of meditation because it is free from the ego process. It's a learning process.
So then it's a method without the ego process.
Yes, it's a method. All methods are to be done non-egoistically, including yoga.
But Krishnamurti doesn't say you can have a method provided there's no ego. He says no method, period, full stop.
Yes, he does say that, but he also says don't accept what I say. He also says investigate for yourself. Find out what I'm trying to imply. Don't interpret, and so on. You come upon your own perceptions in investigating. Yes, it's complex. So that's why, trying to give meaning to his words and then sticking to that meaning often goes wrong. And he himself has warned against doing that don't do that. The truth is not in the words. At one point people said you are using different words at different times. He said, I'll deliberately do that.
But it's not just different words. He says the essence of meditation is not to be conscious that you're meditating. Right?
Yes.
He goes into it. He just does
but
the same thing in different ways.
That is true meditation that he is talking of, which comes later on. That is, he's saying once you have come upon a silent mind, then the true meditation happens. But the first part is just to come upon a relatively silent mind. In the beginning, the mind is all over the place. It's not a silent mind. If you just sit down and sit in a chair and want to remain quiet and just listen to all the sounds and so on, you'll find that the mind is going all over the place. You don't have any control over it. And he says don't control, because the control is again bringing in the controller, which is the ego process. But as you watch, it will slow down. Just if you watch attentively, not with a desire to slow it down, but just to see what happens. If I just sit quietly and watch myself, in order to learn about the way my mind functions, you'll find it slows down. And that's part of the learning process. And he's not objecting to the learning about oneself. That is saying that it is essential. But when you learn and put everything in its right place, then thought ceases to be compulsive. The reason thought is compulsive is because we haven't put it in its right place. And it's a sort of addiction of the mind to go on with thought. Thought is like a tool. It's like a screwdriver. You use the screwdriver when you have to open a nut or bolt. But when you don't have to open a nut and bolt, you just put it in the drawer. It doesn't control you. But when you become addicted to thinking, then what happens? The thought begins to control you and drive you, and not the other way around. So he's suggesting that if we watch what thought is doing, we can see the truth of this, and that will slow it down. So I think that's going to come tomorrow when he talks about can thought be aware of its own limitation and things like that. But all that is part of watching and learning about oneself. the aim of that, not a conscious aim, but a hopeful aim, is for the thought process to slow down and the mind to become silent, non-reactive. Then when that happens, he says the true meditation begins to happen, and that is not conscious meditation. It is something that happens to the brain or in the brain, and you are only witnessing it, but you are not driving it. You are not driving it. It's not. There is no meditator. There is only the observation of the process of meditation. But that is after you come upon a silent mind. The silent mind is a mind that is not reacting and that is free from thought. Because thought is a reaction to whatever it is you are sensing. That's how I understand him to say. Whereas most other systems given by different gurus and so on talk about a deliberate attempt to achieve something, and that in itself slows down the mind and so on. So watching your breath, for example, in Vipassana, but they also do it experimentally. I mean, I have talked to Goenka about it, and he said that we do it in order to expand awareness of what goes on. And in the beginning, thought goes all over the place, so just watch your breath happening and so on, and then it slows down. So it's a technique meant to slow down the thought process. But if it is the slowing down brought about by a technique, then it is still dependent on the technique. It hasn't slowed down. So when the technique is not used, it will again activate, because the cause of it is there. But for Krishnamurti, the silent mind comes about when you have completely understood thought and therefore put it in its right place. And you can use it when you need it, and when you don't need it, it does not interfere. It is silent completely. In that state of a silent mind, there is alertness, there is watchfulness, there is tremendous energy, but no conscious effort from the meditator or the observer. So it's non-interference of the observer. It's observation without the observer, as we said. But observation of the state of mind. Then in that state of mind, the silent state of mind, you can begin to observe meditation happening. And that he calls the true meditation without the meditator. And that is not, it sounds mysterious because I have not experienced that. So I don't know what he is talking about, but that's what he says. That's his teaching, that is true meditation. And all other methods of meditation either sustain the ego or they influence the mind to slow down in its thought process.
So let me see if I follow. You seem to be suggesting that there is a state of what you call true meditation where one is not conscious that one is meditating, where there is truly no method or system, where there is no meditator. But there is also a preliminary stage, a kind of preparatory stage, in which one may engage in various activities which have a certain quality, somewhat, let's say, a sort of semi-methodical quality. It's not a method in the sense of a specific activity designed to achieve a certain goal, but it has a methodical quality in the sense that it is experimental. It entails the undertaking certain deliberate activities, not to achieve a preconceived goal, but rather to observe what happens. But with the general idea that in this process, the awareness of thought will
deepen and therefore
and slow thought down.
Yeah.
Slow thought down and perhaps ultimately come to a place of a truly quiet mind. Is that roughly what you're saying?
Yes, yes. But why, you have to understand as part of self-knowledge why the thought is active when you don't want it to be active. I mean, you're not needing it to be active, but it's still active.
You said compulsive.
So, yeah, compulsive.
Yeah.
So it's some kind of addiction or attachment to thinking that you are probably feeling lost without thinking when you don't think, yeah. And it's like you feel lonely and therefore you develop relationships, or you feel bored and therefore you seek entertainment, things like that. So is thought happening that way in order to hide some other real state or escape from some real state? So why is it compulsive? It's a kind of addiction to thinking. Why can't you remain without thinking? If you have put thought, then thought has been put in its right place. You use it only when you need it, but it's not going on all the time. And that's part of understanding thought, the role of thought in your life, which is part of self-knowledge. When that happens, that means when you have come upon that much self-knowledge or wisdom, whatever word you want to use, and the mind becomes silent, then there is a heightened awareness and a heightened perception is what he says, because then the distraction from thought is not there. Yeah. And you can do your own practice. I mean, you can just, he has given other suggestions like looking at a tree without naming it.
Yeah.
Yeah, just watching the tree, being aware of the light on the tree, the branch, what the tree is doing and everything. Whatever is taking place, just watching it very attentively, clearly, is part of awareness of what is. So his teaching is that change occurs as a byproduct of paying attention to what is, not due to thinking about what is, but just paying attention to what is going on, watching it, brings an understanding which in turn alters the state by watching.
So it seems to me
that's part meditation. Yeah, because that's not a deliberate, purposeful activity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I mean, my understanding of what you're saying suggests to me that you have, if I may put it, you have introduced a kind of refinement or added some nuance to the manner in which Krishnamurti expresses these things in a way that seems to me consistent with the teachings. And it's part of the reason why I appreciate these dialogues, because it does seem to me to be consistent with the teachings.
The way I come to it is by reading many statements of his and trying to summarize that in my mind, integrate that in my mind. When you read only one statement, it's not complete. Yeah, like you read 3 or 4 statements, there are more statements.
Yeah.
There is the statement, for example, that learning about oneself is part of meditation, meditation, that statement also. So you have to put all of them together, then you start getting a sense of what probably he means, probably.
Right. Yeah,
ultimately, ultimate test is that if you reach that state, you know, through contact with the state. But when you are speculating and probably it is this or probably it is that, you are just staying with a question.
Yeah.
You are not perceiving. You are not perceiving. Perception will give you the answer. So you have to wait for that, for the perception to take place. But thought prevents perception, so it's a kind of vicious circle. You are also watching thought, which is happening.
Yeah, one of those statements was, thought is an impediment to meditation, but it is only through meditation that you remove the impediment.
Yes, it's that these are vicious circles, and there is no method for ending it, but the very fact that you are approaching it with a learning mind and looking at it slows it down or changes it. That's the teaching, not your deliberate attempt, because then you bring in the observer, and the observer is the real problem.
Yeah.
Even more than all this thought wandering here and there and so on.
So, Laurie, do you have a question? I thought you...
Well, actually, I was just curious because, over the long time of his teachings, like it may have determined how he talked about meditation, the time period, the country he was in.
Mm-hmm.
Because in India, where meditation for a very long time was very common, different types of meditation. But in the West, it was still just coming, in the 60s and 70s, just being brought over. And now, like mindfulness,
Yeah,
it's
it's
all
everywhere.
about being, without judgment with what's happening inside, So it's been changing over the decades, and then depending on where you were. So I just wonder if he was targeting his talk to the audience, depending on.
It is quite close to the Buddhist view on all this. And he was greatly influenced by Buddhism in his theosophical days, because the Theosophical Society was greatly taken up with Buddha. Both Alcott and Blavatsky became Buddhists. And Alcott went and worked in Sri Lanka, which is Ceylon in those days, as a Buddhist, and did a lot of work, educational work there in Sri Lanka. And Madame Blavatsky also became Buddhist, and all this notion of the Maitreya Buddha and so on comes from Buddhism. And they used, just as we read something from Krishnamurti and then have dialogues about it among ourselves, they used to read from a book called Buddha's Way of Virtue. And then he and Rajgopal and Rao Saab Patwardhan and Yadunandan Prasad, all young people about 25, 30 years of age, would sit together and have dialogues around that. So the Buddhist influence is very strong in this thing. And Leadbeater said that in one of his previous lives he had been a disciple of the Buddha. I'm neither subscribing to it nor opposing it. It's just a fact that Leadbeater said that.
But Krishnamurti denies that he was influenced.
Yes, I was about to say that. He says he felt fortunate that his conditioning, he felt free, it went in one ear and out the other. So I sometimes what I...
There is mystery about that, because you see, something strange happened to him during the process, which is a unique thing. You don't find this process happening to other sages and so on. Something very specific, and even Leadbeater didn't know what was actually taking place. It was not Kundalini, and the masters, according to them, the masters were doing something to his brain and opening it up for the Maitreya consciousness to operate through that body, which was their concept of the world teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they said that the previous world teachers coming, namely the Buddhas coming and the Jesus Christ coming on the earth, happened in that way. So their prediction was that Krishnamurti's body will be used by this Maitreya consciousness to give a new teaching to the world for the scientific age. Now, that he has done. So
yeah.
He has fulfilled that mission.
Absolutely.
But he has denied the authority of being a world teacher. He has not denied being the world teacher. Even on his deathbed he said, the world teacher is still here because I still have these marvelous meditations, especially at night. You can read that in the open door, it is there. He says that. So I'm not willing to write all that off as just hallucinations and so on. There seems to be much more to it than that, but it's mysterious because we don't know anything about it. But when you don't know anything about it, it's also not correct to deny it, because you don't know anything by which you can deny it either.
But he does deny. He denies having been influenced by theosophical ideology. He says he was exposed to a great deal of it, but he denies that it influenced him.
Yes, because there was quite a lot in the theosophical ideology which he didn't agree with, and that was that they had more or less at that time turned it into a sort of religion with their own sacred books, their own authorities, their own rituals which were performed, and the feeling that there are senior people like priesthood who can judge your level of spirituality.
Initiations.
Initiations and so on, and then give you a status that you are first initiate, you are second
level.
initiate, and so on. He denied all that structure and that. But if you read the book by Ariel Sanath called The Inner Life of Krishnamurti, he makes a very strong case. He was a professor of philosophy in Washington, D.C. The name he took on, but he's an American. And he has given a lot of factual information on what Krishnamurti himself said about all this and so on, which corroborates that what the Theosophists said may not have been exactly the way they said, but that it was to a large extent true. And that last statement of Krishnamurti made on his deathbed, 7th February 1986, where he says that an enormous intelligence and energy has passed through this body and used this body for 70 years, and now the body can't take it anymore, and so on. So that more or less corroborated the whole thing, that his body was somehow specially prepared and used by the Maitreya consciousness. Or the name Maitreya consciousness had Buddhist connotations. It need not be, but he says in one place, for example, it is there in Mary Latience's biography, he says to her that this boy is uneducated. He hardly knows anything. He's not intelligent in the normal sense of the word. He couldn't possibly have come upon all this and thought out all this teaching. You know what happens? It all comes to me like a revelation.
Revelation. Yeah.
Revelation.
Yeah.
Now, whether you call that revelation as insight, or whether you call it Maitreya, or so on, it is something creative that is happening in his brain. Whether it was done by the masters or it was some special divine message, we don't know. There have been other people. Joan of Arc used to get divine messages. Mrs. Besant used to get messages about all this and so on. And Leadbeater had clairvoyance and so on. So it's all in that realm of the occult and the extrasensory perception and so on.
But he says...
Which is all mysterious for someone who doesn't have that.
No, but he says that to put it in these forms, such as Maitreya, etc., is too concrete.
Yeah.
So he does reject that specificity of it. He acknowledges something, but he says that the human consciousness cannot grasp it. He says there's a great reservoir of mystery, and the mind cannot grasp it.
Yeah, he came to that quite early, even during the Theosophical days. If you read Kingdom of Happiness and those poems which came through him in those days, he said it doesn't matter whether you call it Krishna or you call it Maitreya or you call it the Buddha. These are just names. I won't use any of those traditional loaded names. I have just called it Beloved, the Beloved. So he said, I am one with the beloved. The beloved was this state, which is not his thought state, where the observer is not there, but it all comes and pours through him. You find Plato mentioning this kind of thing. You find Socrates mentioning this kind of thing. You find some of the artists, I think it was Mozart probably, who said that I don't think out my music. I just tune my mind and it flows through me. It's all there, out there, and it flows through me. Because when it's creative, from where is it coming? It's not coming from you.
Yeah.
It's coming from somewhere out there. So Krishnamurti called that the mind. He said the mind is outside the brain, and it can send messages and work through the brain. And how that happens is mysterious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So science doesn't know any of this. It doesn't consider mind in the universe. There is one dialogue between David Bohm and Krishnamurti. The video itself is termed mind in the universe. And he's saying the universe is in a state of meditation.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that. So it's all fairly, we don't know anything about all this, but apparently there is something far more than what we know. I would leave it there.
Yeah.
There's no reason why there should not be mystery.
Yeah.
Life is a mystery.
Mystery, great mystery, yes, of course.
What we know is very little. What we don't know is much more.
Right.
And he probably knew much more than what we know. That's all.
I was just like going back to the meditation, like the fact is that, spiritual bypassing is really, really common. In different types, you hear it a lot using
I've heard that
meditation.
phrase, but I don't know what it means.
It's kind of like Krishnamurti is saying, it's like a form of it's being like a form of self-hypnosis to escape. It's using a way to escape or distract or to not be with whatever is, right? It's so easy to get hijacked through my experiences of being around a lot of meditators where it's just people are using it to check out, right?
They use the idea of spirituality as a way of avoiding or escaping.
We're hoping to become enlightened in that, but the fact is you don't see I don't know anybody who has.
So
But
bypassing means bypassing what is, bypassing the actuality of what is happening.
No, but there is a lot of self-deception in all that.
Yeah.
So if you read Key to Theosophy by Blavatsky, she says very clearly that don't indulge in occultism and don't try to cultivate these extrasensory powers before you have completely eradicated the personality. That means become free from ego and ended. Then it is safe to indulge in it. Otherwise, you will you will deceive yourself. And she even goes to the extent of saying that people who do that become mad. And there are instances of people in the Theosophical Society, some of the leaders who became mad because they indulge in all this without freeing themselves from the ego process.
Arundel?
And Wedgwood.
Oh.
And Colestrom. Yeah.
Used to strip himself.
Pardon?
Wedgwood used to strip himself and
Yeah, all kinds of things. But, I mean, not to name people, but this warning is there in the Key to Theosophy written by Blavatsky. And Blavatsky was, of course, one of the greatest occultists who predicted for the future, who predicted that the coming of the world teacher, on the basis of which Mrs. Besant and Leadbeater chose Krishnamurti. So all that, the fact that it has all turned out to be true, this boy, though he was emaciated and dull, became this world teacher. If you read Mary Letian, she says it was impossible to believe that that boy I had met when he was 14 years of age could become this teacher like this, and so on. So it is some kind of mysterious phenomenon that has happened. We don't have explanations of this. And Krishnamurti didn't like to talk about it. He said, there are things I am not permitted to tell.
Oh, do you think he was actually steering people away from meditation then?
No, away from all this engaging in what is Maitreya consciousness and is he the world teacher or not. He said, don't worry about what I am, you will never understand, and what is going through this body and so on. It's not necessary. You engage yourself with the teaching. Forget the
No,
teacher.
and I know, but I mean about the teachings. Was he steering people away from meditation? When he was
No.
talking about meditation,
No,
was he
he-
trying to steer people away from...
Well, he was pointing out what is not meditation and saying that you have to discover what meditation is, not accept. You see, throughout his teaching, this is there. He says, what you think is God is not God. But he has not denied God. He said, posit the God as the unknown and discover what it is. He has not denied the sacred, but he has denied all our notions about the sacred. The Hindu thinks the cow is sacred, the so-and-so thinks the tree is sacred, and so on. You are attributing sacredness to something, and then you are worshipping what your own thought. This is a deception or illusion.
To learn it anew.
Yes, but he has not denied that. He has not denied sacred or God. So he's not an atheist. But he's saying posit it as the unknown and come in contact with it. Then you will know. But your concept has no meaning. Concept is just an illusion.
Krishnamurti also said, vis-a-vis the question of who was he or what was he said he himself could not answer the question. He may have had some knowledge that he was not allowed to share or what have you, but he said he himself could not answer. He said water can never know what water is. And he said if Mary Lutchens or Mary Zimbalist could see something that they could share with him, he might be able to confirm it. But in and of himself, he could not provide the answer to the question that she was putting.
So all this is a mystery. See, when he says to me, there are things I am not permitted to tell, who is not permitting him? Is it a vow that he took earlier?
Yeah.
Is it the masters who have told him that you will not do this, reveal this? We don't know. But all that I am saying is there is a great mystery about him, what happened in his consciousness and to him. So just leave it as a mystery, because that's not what we need to do. What he is saying is that if he thought that that was the way, through the masters and so on, that was the way to come to liberation, he wouldn't have denied all that.
Yeah.
So there is also a dialogue which I now am not able to source it as to where did I read it, but I distinctly remember having read this conversation. Somebody asked him a question. You are asking us to look at ourselves in the mirror of relationship and learn from that. Did you do all that? And he said, no sir, I didn't have to, but I see that you do. Yeah. I don't remember now, some friend said, where did he say that? And I have not been able to locate it. But I do remember, it couldn't be that my mind has cooked this up. So I believe that it is there, but I don't know where it is.
Yeah.
And someday I'll find it. But he did say that, and it's true. He didn't do it that way. But the teaching is, and he put it in the following way. He said, Columbus went to America with great difficulty, but we can now go by jet directly. So it's like that. I went through all that process, the theosophical milieu, this and that and so on, and came upon it, okay? But now I'm telling you there is a direct way, and so you investigate this. So that's what his teaching is, that. So it is not that we have to imitate him and get in touch with masters and then the masters will do it to us. No. He was a chosen body. They did some experiment through him. We don't know what that was. It's a mystery. It's all written and documented. So it's not a mystery that it happened. But it's a mystery as to what all that is. We don't know what happened there. And he has not denied the masters. He said, I talked to the master. And his exact words to me when I asked him, sir, what was all that? Was it all hallucination? He said, no, sir, those things exist. It's another form of power. It has nothing to do with goodness, therefore I'm not interested in it. So that's what he was interested in, this freedom from the ego, because that brings virtue, and that is real religion. All this is not religion, it is another power. And the religious mind not interested in power. It doesn't want to dominate, it doesn't want anything for itself. Why would it seek power? Yeah. So, and they warn that when you come upon this self-knowledge and wisdom on this path of inquiry, which is Gyan Marg according to Hindus, then these siddhis will come, which are these extrasensory perceptions or occult happenings and so on. The sixth sense, a sort of sixth sense will start opening up. You will have clear vision and clear, and that's a distraction away from the real work, and one should not pursue it. That warning is given in Buddhist literature and also in Hindu literature. But the tantrics practice it. You know, there is a branch of Hinduism which practices all this. But this business of leaving the body and traveling, astral travel, and doing all kinds of things, that mystery, it happens. It is all there. It's another form of power. Nothing to do with religion in the real sense, true sense of the word. Religion is about virtue, and virtue requires freedom from the ego. That's the first step. That's how I understand him telling us. But it's a great mystery that they predicted that this world teacher is going to come, that it will be in an Asian body, and they chose that body, and it was a dull boy. All educationists said he's dull. Bernard Shaw was laughing at Mrs. Besant. She staked her whole reputation and she announced it in the Whitehall in London. So she had obviously a divine source of information on which she could rely. It was not just a rational decision of logic and thinking and seeing. Because any logical person would have said Nitya is a better candidate. This boy is too dull. But turned out that that boy was the one that became the world teacher. And Krishnamurti himself, as he said there is a great mystery about it. Why did this boy, what protected this boy? Why did he not get conditioned? And he says that has that energy, that other, protected this boy all along throughout life. I feel that protection and so on. So there is a lot of mystery about it. You may not call it Maitreya or Krishna consciousness, or that depends on your religious background, which name you will give to it. But it's something other than normal brain thinking and so on. Yeah, beyond that, beyond the mind. So in my book also I have mentioned that there is a great mystery about Krishnamurti which nobody knows, because I have interviewed people who have been close to him, much closer than me, for 30, 40 years, lived with him, moved with him, traveled with him. And when this book, The Inner Life of Krishnamurti, was published, it was being discussed in the International Trustees meeting in Brockwood whether we should sell it. And I was against it because I said it's a theory about Krishnamurti and we don't know if it is true. Therefore we should not. Our job is to propagate the teaching, spread the teaching, and this is not the teaching, it is some theory about the man. So Mary Zimbalist said, every word in that book is true. Someone who lived closely with him for 20 years, saying every word in that book is true. I had to change my mind. I said, well, she knows. He must have talked to her about it. But he never talked about this to other people, only with very close associates, because he did not want that people should accept what he was telling on the authority of his being the world teacher. But he knew that he is the world teacher. He just didn't want public to accept his words. He said, don't accept what I say, investigate it. It points to the truth. There is one interesting interview by ABC Television, which is Australian Broadcasting Corporation, where the interviewer is saying something to Krishnaji, and Krishnaji says, "Sir, we are all so confused." And this man stops him and says, "When you say we are all confused, are you also confused?" That puts Krishnaji on a spot. He goes back like this and looks at him and says, No, I'm not confused." That means he knew that his memory or his conditioning is not interfering with his perception. That's what causes confusion, because the subjective element. And if you are freed from that, if you are free from your conditioning, then what you see is the actuality. But otherwise, what you see is the image of what you're seeing, and then that image is relayed to the brain, and from the memory it throws up all these images and so on, which are associated with that site, of previous sites like that and related things. You have read about it and so on. And this whole thing mixes together and creates what you call my experience. And therefore it's not pure perception. It is clouded by subjective, because your own input, the observer is giving inputs into the observation. And so the Hindu looks at the cow and says it's a goddess. So he is contributing the goddess to he's not seeing it just as a cow. It's like that kind of thing. You can see it in yourself, and therefore you have to be also guarded about intuition. You know, you often in films, the same actor takes the role of a villain. So you have seen those movies, and always that face has been associated with villainy. So that image forms in your brain. And you meet somebody in a party who resembles that face, your intuition will say, something is wrong with this man. I should not go close to him. He may be a perfectly normal person. You are getting completely wrong picture, because your own mind is projecting that. That's what comes from the subconscious. It's there, the subconscious. So unless you have cleared out this muck of the subconscious and so on, there was one of the questions yesterday which was raised was, how do we learn about the subconscious or the unconscious and so on. I have no first-hand knowledge of it, but this book, The Wholeness of Life, if you read the book Wholeness of Life, which are dialogues with David Bohm and some other people, Krishnaji says all this freedom from the ego and self-knowledge is all very superficial. That's the very initial step. Before that, learning doesn't even begin. After you have done that, then your mind becomes silent, and your observation becomes keen. And then when the silent mind is silent, the conscious mind is silent, the subconscious comes into the conscious. And it can also be watched, and it can also be understood and emptied. Means you can become free of it. Then the collective subconscious comes of the whole species, and that can also be watched. And you can go to the source of all creation and so on. We are struggling with the first step. So that man, I don't know, he went very far into all this great mystery. It's in dialogue 3 or 4. He talks about this. that all this what we are talking are all very superficial. So this meditation has great depths. All that is also meditation. The subconscious and the clearing of the subconscious, which I am mentioning, all that part meditation. But first step is the silencing of the thought process, which is the conscious process of your conditioning. Thought comes from there. When that becomes silent, then you're free of that. When you're free of that, then your awareness is reliable, a reliable source of what is true and what is false. Yeah. The Buddhists call it, in Hindi it is called to see something as it is. Just katas dekhna. You see it as it is. That means no association of anything else, no image, nothing. To come to that state of mind, that's the free mind, silent mind. It just sees it. It is not contributing anything from its side. It's observing without the observer. Without the observer means without the interference of the observer. The observer, of course, is there in the sense that the brain and the eyes are there, but the memory is not contributing anything, images into it. It's surprising, but Mrs. Besant wrote about this before Krishnamurti came on the scene. There is a passage by Mrs. Besant where she talks about this observer and observed and the interference, and then she says that only very advanced seers can free themselves from this contribution from their own memory and the images lying there, and only then what they see is reliable observation. She talked about it. What subsequently is observer is observed and all that. She has talked about it. It's there in 1913 when Krishnamurti was not on the scene. And she talked about not accepting an authority. She said, don't make me into an authority. It has no value to accept something on authority. A lot of things which Krishnamurti... I'm not saying that Krishnamurti got it from her. I think he came upon it for himself. But she had also come upon all those truths for herself.
She talked about the observer and the observed.
Yes.
In those terms.
Yeah, I can send you that passage, or if you have a copy of my book, it is there. I have quoted that whole passage. It is in Krishnamurti and Theosophy, the chapter on Krishnamurti.
Yeah, I have no theosophical background, so I find this usually interferes with my, his teaching was free of all of this kind of reference as far as I came across it, and yet seemed very kind of true, and I find this gets, it's almost as if I have to accept a lot of beliefs about things then if I'm to think this way, rather than sort of staying with his teaching, but perhaps not. I mean, I don't know. I haven't read it.
No beliefs, just that there is a great mystery, that's all. That's not a belief, to know that there is a great mystery that was behind the consciousness of this man. That's just a fact. There's no reason why mystery should not be there.
No. All right. But going back to that steps of meditation and method, I mean, I never understood him really to be saying there is a method by which you can, bring up the observer and the observed as one, or I was wondering whether we get confused because there could be psychophysical techniques, if you like, which are good for the body. I mean, I think I've even heard him talk this way, sort of, like brushing your teeth. It's good for you. He did yoga, he did breathing exercise, he did all of that. But he didn't give it, I don't think I had, as far as I understood, he didn't give it the value that, this is going to, you're going to reach enlightenment, or this was not.
No, but I said that.
Spiritual achievement.
Yeah, that's
it's a
true.
necessary good thing for the body, but But so, I also understood him sort of to say that awareness, attention almost comes about naturally when we are truly interested in something. It's what
Yes.
happens when we love something.
Yeah.
That will be there. So
Mhm.
that it kind of, in that state, if we were really interested, if we were so for me, I've sort of been understanding that in the sense of what he also said, the first step is the last step. If you approach anything with that, I mean, meditation could be taking place anywhere out in the street. You're attentive, you're aware, out of the interest in seeing what is going on.
Yeah.
There's no, and that's the goal. There's no sense that, I'm achieving something or I'm
Yeah.
becoming spiritual or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So,
That's the same as freedom from conditioning,
yeah,
is the same as silent mind, is the same as this meditation that he's talking of. The whole thing is one. Whole thing is one. And when you go very deeply, you will find that truth and beauty and intelligence. He uses the word intelligence. There is no intelligence without wisdom, without compassion. And which means he's talking of intelligence as wisdom. And all that is one. All that is one. When you go, you see it separately because we think in fragments. But when you come to the source and you see the whole thing in one connection, he says it's all one. And it's not only he, there are also, Keats says that also, no? That truth is beauty and beauty truth. That's all there is to know and all that you need to know. So apparently some artists and poets and so on have also reached that state, and may not be the total enlightenment, but they have reached some state from where they have made these statements. So long as the mind is trapped in the thought process, we live in a very small world of our own thoughts, created by our own thoughts, and we are out of touch with reality. That's how I understand it. You are living in this small shell or prison of the creation of your own thinking, which is just a subjective reality of your own, and you are not in contact with the whole of reality. And therefore it is necessary to free yourself of this prison of conditioning. Get out of that limitation of thought, which doesn't mean you cannot use thought, but it's no longer confined only in that circle.
Just one observation. So I don't know whether you put it out or there was a note, there is probably still a note by David Baum on a 2-pager which I read in the morning. It was kept outside. And it is interesting that in that note he basically gives a description of what he took away from Krishnamurti, from his teaching, from his interactions with him. There were 2 things he mentioned. One is the scientific approach, and he found that as a scientist, he finds that very appealing. The second thing he mentions is meditation, and so he says that his approach to meditation is something that he really felt is necessary to understand the inner order as compared to the outer order. And he says, at least as per that note, that meditation has a loaded term, just like God and many other terms, and that is one reason why we need to get rid of the baggage that comes with that term, which includes the method and sitting in one place and all that. So in order to get rid of that baggage, probably he used these words that it doesn't have a method, etc., etc., just to, it's probably 1,000 years or more of baggage associated with that term. So if you need to get rid of that, then you need to probably talk about it in a completely different way. And again, David Bohm in that says, just look at the root of the word. And he says the root of the word is to introspect or to reflect. And if you are in that constant state of reflection or introspection, that is meditation. And so you can replace that word with some of the words that you have been using, like choiceless awareness or a state of consciousness. And that probably equally applies, to
Or
describe whatever you say.
observing without the observer is the same thing. The observer is not projecting anything into the observation. Yeah, he wrote a very deep analysis of thought as a system, showing that it's a very deep rooted system. So when you talk about silent mind, you have to see the danger of that, the prison of the thought as a system operating within you, so that you can go beyond it. He was one of the people who went very deep into Krishnamurti's teaching.
Are you aware of Krishnamurti advocating silent sitting? Apart from in the schools where he would advocate it for the students, but as something that would be worthwhile in daily life?
Yeah, I mean, he advocated a number of ways to begin this process of self-knowledge. One of which was to keep a diary and note down all your thoughts, and then or reflect on it. As you go to bed, you reflect on what all you have been doing through the day. So these are ways on which you can begin to introspect or look inwards instead of... Our education draws our mind towards the external world all the time. Why the sun shines, what is the moon, how does the moon give its light, history, geography, etc. All about the external world. And he is asking us to turn that awareness towards the inner world of our consciousness and learn about it. And to begin that process, to students he is saying, can you just sit quietly, watch the outside, and now also turn your gaze towards the inside and watch to the inside like that. That's one way of beginning to understand what meditation could possibly mean. But that's not the culmination of meditation, it's just a beginning of introspection and so on. So he is giving that as a way to begin, but he is not giving that as a way to meditate. So he is saying ultimately the true meditation is something that happens after you have come upon a silent mind. It occurs in the mind, you don't meditate. Meditation happens to you, not you meditate.
So in India, none of the schools, outside the schools, in none of the centers where adults come, do they ever sit silently together?
Yeah, we sit silently together, but it's not meditation. You sit, you sing songs, and then you sit in silence for 2-3 minutes. You have a dialogue, then sit in silence for 2-3 minutes. It's not silence in the sense that the thought process is going on in your brain. Yeah. He means by silence absence of all reaction within. So it's not external silence. The one silence is there is no noise anywhere. You can do that in a studio, you close all the doors and windows, you can experience silence. That's not silence. Silence is absence of thinking, absence of reaction from within you. That is real silence. So silence The external silence is different from the inner silence. But after you have come to the silent mind and come upon self-knowledge, the meditation which he experienced, he is saying it is not, it is without meditator, it is something that happens. So when our first job is to go through self-knowledge, come upon the silent mind, become free from thinking, and then we can ask the question, what is real meditation? Before that, it's all speculative. You are not in that state. His whole teaching is don't speculate. Come in contact with it. He wouldn't accept even speculation about reincarnation. You have to come upon that state wherein you perceive it to be true. Otherwise, don't believe in it. The Buddha also said that. Don't accept something because I say it. Don't accept it because it's written in a book. Don't accept it because some other guru or teacher is saying it. You investigate it, and if you find it is true, then you accept it as true.
Shall we call it a night?
It will be night whether you call it or not.
All right.
You have 10 minutes, so you can, some last doubt or question or comment if anybody wants to make. This is your opportunity. Otherwise, we meet tomorrow on some other topic. Can you put the cat out of the bag? What's the topic for tomorrow?
Is illusion the source of disorder?
Yeah.
Does disorder in consciousness arise from illusions, and is psychological becoming an illusion?
Yeah, sure. Those are important parts of the teaching.
So now, as we have little time, because you have been associated with him, so I'm asking. One, do you, for many of these meetings, do you prepare at all? Do you need to prepare? Do you need to think about these things, or you just spontaneously, react? And second, based on your knowledge of Krishnamurti, was he preparing ever, or was he, thinking about the right way of communication? Because these are very complex ideas.
No, as far as I know, maybe in the initial stages he has mentioned he used to write out his talk and read it and so on. But by the time I met him and so on, I never saw him preparing his talks. And in fact, he would often come to the meeting and say, what shall we talk about? When people would ask him to talk about something, he would talk about that. So he didn't come prepared. It was almost always spontaneous and extempore. Yeah. That's why on the same question he will answer in different ways, in different places, and so on. You can read. And if you are doing it like a professor and writing from memory, it will be repetitive. But his teachings don't feel repetitive. Even though you have seen the video, you hear it again, you are again, you feel a freshness in it. It doesn't become repetitive. So it's probably because of that. Yeah. Spontaneous. It's not like, he was not like a scholar. Certainly not. The first one was about.
So, for example, if once you...
Yeah, now I don't know, because all these things I have been going over it so many times for 50 years, so now I don't need to prepare. You can ask anything. If I don't know, I say I don't know, but if I know it, then whatever comes, I mention that. But it doesn't mean that I have perceived everything that I talk about. So the ability to talk about it or to explain Krishnamurti's teaching is just an ability. It doesn't mean that I'm in that state of consciousness. And the important thing is the state of consciousness, not the explanations. There is one dialogue where David Moody is asking him something, and he says, "Are you only interested in explanations?" So his whole teaching is that the important thing is to come upon perception, not explanation. So his own teaching also, he says, don't accept it. What I'm giving you is an explanation. Explanation is, the word is not the thing. The idea is not the truth. So you have to come upon perception, and that you can do only by investigating it, not by accepting it. So it's just the opposite of what all other gurus and religious teachers try to say, that you must just obey and accept it. This is the truth, not the truth. He was very clear on that issue. So when he says in the beginning of almost any video session, he will say, "Sir, I am not trying to convince you of anything. And this is not a lecture. We are sharing this together. We are observing together. I'm addressing each one of you, though I may be speaking from a platform and so on, but I am talking to each one of you. And you have to come." So he wanted it that way, but we were not able to do it that way, so we took it like a lecture. But he was making it clear, not out of politeness, but because he saw that there is no value in just intellectually dissecting and analyzing and finding out whether it's rational or not rational. As knowledge, it has value. As communication also, it has value, but it has no value from the point of view of perception of truth. In fact, the words can delude you. And in my book, there is one chapter where I interviewed Achyut Patwardhan. And one of the very poignant things which he said as a confession, he said, "Krishna, I have been a good public speaker, but nobody knows how many tears I have shed, wishing I didn't have this facility with words. For words have a way of making you feel you have understood when you have not understood." So that's a very subtle form of illusion, that you think you have understood, you have not perceived, but you think you have perceived because you have understood. So intellectual understanding is a deception. It's not the truth. As knowledge it is true, as an idea it is true, but it is not the truth. Reminds me of a question someone asked him. He said, "Sir, if I say the observer is the observed, will that be true?" And he said, "Yes, it will be true, but there won't be any truth in it." Make sense of that. It is true as a statement, but it's not true because you haven't perceived it. That's what he's saying. So there will be no truth in it. It will be true, but there will be no truth in it. He was very clear. And in Brockwood, I went to him once and I said, "Sir, you only distinguish between one man who is free and the other man who is not free. Does it mean that anyone who is still not free from the self is necessarily evil? Immediately he replied, no, not he is evil. There is evil in him. The two things are very different, no? His evil is a judgment about a human being. That's wrong. But that there is evil in him to the extent the self is still operating there is true. And that's true for all of us. To the extent to which we can be egotistic, evil is operating through us. The devil does his work through the ego in man. So each one of us is also a plaything of the of the devil, so long as we are not free. There is also another interesting dialogue I would like to share with you. When he is handing over charge of Brockwood to Scott Forbes, he says to him, is Scott aware that the seed of intelligence is there in him? Intelligence not as we know it, but as wisdom. That the seed of intelligence is there in him. He has nothing to do with it. It takes its own course and it has its own flowering. But he can kill it. So it's your responsibility not to kill that seed of wisdom. It is there in each one of us. The seed of wisdom is there, and I am the one who is blocking its flowering. That's what we are responsible for, not blocking our flowering. So each one of us is responsible for that. What he is saying to Scott applies to all of us. So his whole emphasis is you are the teacher and you are the taught. You alone can free yourself. You alone are responsible for what your life becomes and what you experience and everything. The whole thing is on you. And nobody else can help you. Help in inverted commas. A small help, yes, something about yoga, something about health he can give, but help you to come upon truth, no. Or freedom, no. Once he was saying, I think to Doris Pratt, that these people who go about doing good are such an abomination or something. So she said, well, you go about lecturing all over the world, aren't you also doing good? And he said, yes, but I don't do it on purpose. All right, sir. Good night. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for your patience.